Good morning and welcome to SEDA College Online. Very glad to see you again and hope everybody is well. So today's presentation is talking about why is learning English vocabulary so challenging. And the reason for this has to be the eclectic nature of the language. And in talking about this, I'm going to give you a brief history of the English language, a look at the different origins of some English words, and a vocabulary exercise on borrowed words. So the eclectic nature of the English vocabulary, I'm afraid that this is why English is so difficult, because there are no one set of rules that work for everything, because the language has evolved over such a long time and has had influence from so many people over such a wide area that it's impossible to hope that there would be one organized body of language that all work the same way. So I just am going to show you a little bit about the history of the language and show you all the different influences that got involved in it, which will show you why it's obvious that it's going to be a real mishmash of ideas. We have Celtic influence, German influence, Roman influence, Viking influence, French influence. We have influence from the advent of printing, Greek influence through the Renaissance. And we have modernization and the Industrial Revolution. We have colonialization and a sort of a global influence that happened on English language. And like the current global world that we live in today is further influencing and changing the language. So you can see that there, with all these different people, different cultures feeding into the language, it's obvious that it's going to be a real mishmash. So a brief history of the language. Let's have a look. English is divided into three. It's considered to be Old English, Middle English, and Modern English. So Old English takes you up to 1100 AD, then Middle English to 1500 AD, and then Modern English since then. So I don't know if you guys know much about English literature, but obviously literature is important because it's the written form. So Old English, we would look at a text called Beowulf, and would be considered one of the greatest texts of Old English, and that's where we can study English and see how it was the same and how it was different. Middle English, we associate, Old English, it was biblical, I beg your pardon. Middle English was Beowulf, and Modern English was Shakespeare. So a brief look at the English language. Let's have a look. Do you recognise this picture? So this is Newgrange. And so this is like a pre-Christian culture, very ancient Ireland. So we're going back to that period before Christianity, when the Vikings were around as part of the Viking Empire. It was built long before the Vikings were there, but they found Viking coins and things like that in Newgrange, so we know that the Vikings actually visited us in Newgrange. So before the Saxons arrived, the language spoken in England and in Ireland was a mixture of Latin and Celtic languages. So the Romans brought Latin to Britain, and then otherwise, so words like wine and candle and belt and wall, these are very old Roman words, and then Celtic was not written down, so it's very difficult for us to have too much knowledge on how exactly that language looked. Then, so the beginning of English is that the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes. These were people that were coming from Germany and Denmark, Germany and Denmark, and all you can see all the way along the coast there, Holland. They were warlike, and they came and they took over the country. So the people were still there, and they became part of the culture there. And genetically, the English are not different from the Welsh or the Scottish or the Irish anymore, but culturally people think that the English are different than the Irish and the Scottish and the Welsh. So that was like the very first beginning of this Germanic language, which became English. They mix their different Germanic dialects, all these different Germanic people, and the word English, it comes from Angle, and so the Engel was the land of their origin, so English is not from England, if you like, but English was developed on England as a mixed language from the Saxons, the Angles and the Jutes in the very beginning. And then here we have a picture of Saint Augustine, and so after the Germans and the Danish settled down, then Christianity arrived, and Christianity would have brought influence from Rome, obviously. A lot of religious words like church and bishop and baptism and Eucharist and presbytery came through Latin, through Rome, from Greek, and obviously this was written down, so that's why we can see it, because they wrote, the scribes, very, very important in Ireland in terms of the development of language and in terms of seeing what languages were used and how it was used, because they wrote. So they had a problem that Latin didn't match with Germanic sounds, so they were writing local dialect, and it didn't match with what they knew from Latin because it didn't sound the same, and so then they invented their own ways of, their own phonetic systems, and then pronunciation changed, but because they'd written it down, then it became accepted as the right spelling. So maybe at some point the pronunciation did sound the way that was written, but then the pronunciation changed and the writing didn't change, and so there you have the beginning of the shift between the spoken language and the written language. So there's a picture there that you can see of Augustine of Canterbury from the 6th century. And he was the first Archbishop of Canterbury, the apostle to England and the founder of the Catholic Church in England. So England and Ireland would have been quite similar in terms of what was going on at that time. Then the next people to come were the Vikings. In 878, the Danes and the Norsemen, the Vikings, they came. So this is another wave from not too far from where the Angles and the Jutes, Saxons, came from, a little bit further north perhaps, and they brought more Germanic influence in Norse, and these words we know they're Norse words: sky and egg and cake and skin and leg and window and husband, fellow, skill, anger, flat, old, ugly. All these words are like ancient words that came to us through the Vikings. So Beowulf is Old English, and it was produced between 900 and 10,000, 1000 AD. And to say it's a poem, it's about defeating demon and a dragon, and it's quite long, and it's impressive in that it tells us about the language, and that there's a lot of it. And then after that we had William the Conqueror, and so he was important because he was French. And so he brought his French nobles, and they took over the court and everything, and so language was then pushed down. They used Latin as their language, and English wasn't fashionable anymore at all, so English was kind of gone. He invaded in 1066, killed King Harold in the Battle of Hastings, and then he was crowned king. And then what's interesting, you'll see there, it says there that he actually went back to Normandy, so he didn't even want to live in England, he just wanted to own it. And so I guess it's kind of obvious that it would happen that he would then lose power because he didn't actually even stay in the country. And so then, we have then. So he just sort of disappeared, and English came back. But this English was different now because it had English with French. So all the influences that William brought in terms of Latin in the court and French language spoken, and English being the language of the working people and French being the language of the aristocrats, that all got mixed in. We got this idea that French was much more elegant and superior to English. So words like crown and castle, parliament, army, mansion, gown, beauty, banquet, these words are all from that period. And what's interesting about food, so animals are English words like ox and cow and calf and sheep, but the meat comes from French words. So mutton and pork and bacon and venison, those are the words that the French use. So they're English words when the English people are cooking and preparing the food, or looking after the animals and making the meat. And then when they're being cooked and presented to the wealthy French-speaking people, they change their name to French language. So English is taken from so many different sources. Then after that, we got the printing press. And then obviously that's important because at that point, masses of language gets published, gets written down. And it's much cheaper to write things down and to share them around among the population. And so from that point on, there's much more standardization because the written word is being used by so very many more people than ever was before. So we call this the beginning of modern English. Books were cheaper and printing brought standardization. So the world was getting smaller and different people could share the same texts, and then they could begin to standardize things. So by the time Shakespeare was writing, the language was recognizably modern English. So Shakespeare is we consider him to be our best, one of our best ever writers, the Bard of England, they call him. He liked phrasal verbs, and he was writing away at that time, and his language is still pretty similar to what we use today, recognizably anyway, the English that we use. But from that time until now, there was the Renaissance, there was the Industrial Revolution, there was colonialization, and these things really changed the language again. So like in the Renaissance, there was this, it means, rebirth, the French word, and it's the rebirth of the Greek and the Latin cultures in Europe, and this was sophisticated, and so then people went crazy to go back to Greek and Latin, and so then they brought in Greek and Latin rules and ideas and grammar into the language that didn't actually exist. It wasn't actually part of our language, but they, in order to make the language more sophisticated, they developed these Greek and Latin forms, but pronunciation didn't change. The receipt, doubt, they came from Greek and Latin. Island with this silent S, that was just a fancy Greek and Latin word that they just thought would be fun to put into the language. So the ancient origins of the words were put into the spelling by the elite, but the ordinary people who were spelling it, who were talking it, they didn't change their pronunciation just because the elite had decided to change the spelling. So there you have a shift between spelling and written form and pronunciation. So the industrialization, what do you think that did to the language? The world changed so much, international trade increased so much, and industry changed. So all the technology that was there had to have new words for it. So trains and engines and pulleys, combustion, electricity, telephone, telegraph, camera, all those words, they were all new because they'd just been invented. And then colonialization happened. So Britain was an empire for 200 years. They were in Asia, they were in South America, they were in Africa, they were everywhere, weren't they? And so as the people interacted with other languages, they brought more vocabulary into English. Kangaroo, boomerang, juggernaut, turban came from India. Lots of new influences came into the language as they brought English out into a sort of global context. So why is learning English vocabulary so challenging? Well, because it's so eclectic, because you can't set one set of rules for spelling, you can't set one set of rules for pronunciation, you can't set a set of rules. You have so many divergent words that mean the same thing. You have like a Latin equivalent, you have a phrasal verb equivalent. So it's eclectic. I've given you a little brief history to try and show you like why it's so eclectic. And now I'm just going to show you like a few different words, a few different language groups where words were taken from. Of course, this list is in no way extensive, but just to show you how words have been taken in from so many different places. So these words are all German words, but they're like a common part of our language. To abseil, angst, as in anxiety or depression. Delicatessen, to deli. You probably all know that word from buying your lunch, but it's a German word. Then a fest, like Oktoberfest, is a party. Kindergarten, that's interesting because we call it kindergarten now in English. And my child's going to kindergarten, and so we change the t to a d, and so now when you see it written, some people write it kindergarten and some people write it kindergarten, because it's a borrowed word. Kindergarten means children's garden. Noodle, rucksack, and spare rib. These are all German words. Then we have masses of French words, as we say. Etiquette, that's interesting, originated in the French court of Louis XIV. And so an etiquette is a little card that you write on. So they used to write little tickets to remember what they needed to say in court. And then, so the idea of these little tickets became the word, which means how to conduct yourself in polite society, follow the correct etiquette, the correct sort of social rules. So that's like a French word with a concept that came behind it. The dentist, dent, is a tooth in French, so dentist is tooth person, toother. A discount means a piece cut off, from couper, to cut. A rectangle is a recht, like a right angle, a straight rectangle. Right, recht in German is straight. Yeah, straight angle. A renaissance is a rebirth, so we know that word. Rebirth. A queue is a tail, so in French, a queue is a tail, and then that's what your queue is. It looks like a tail. Ambule is to walk, so ambulance is a walking hospital. A detour is a change of direction. A tour is like we go for a walk. Amuse is to entertain. And then this is an interesting word, chic. It's a French word that we use in English. Oh, you look really chic. But there's also a German word, chic. So possibly chic came from German, went to France, and then went from France to England. So you can see that the languages, they all keep mixing up and mashing around. They don't really belong to only one person. Then cemetery is a Greek word. Comes from sleep. So That's interesting. Cemetery is dormitory for the dead. Democracy, power for the people. A dinosaur, that's interesting because a dinosaur, according to is a Greek word, and it means a bad lizard from Denos, a terrible lizard. So that's pretty interesting. Marathon, I think this is interesting. A marathon comes from the Greek when Phidippides ran all the way to Athens from a battlefield to announce that the Persians had been defeated. So he was delighted, but then he collapsed and died, and he'd just run 42.1 theoretically kilometers, which is the distance between Marathon, a city called Marathon, and Athens. Melancholy comes from the Greek, means black bile. So, yeah, there you go. And then some more Greek words. Music. Music comes from the muses, the goddesses that presided over art and science. Panic, from Pan, the goat god Pan, who spread terror. Planet. Planet means to wander, because planets were wandering stars, according to the ancient Greeks. Sarcasm is like stripping of your flesh in Greek. So a sneering comment. And then this tele word, so telephone, telescope, telegraph, that means distance. So that's that would have been made when they invented those words, and they took an ancient Greek word and used it as a prefix to create all these new words about technology. Now I've just got some Arabic words for you here, like assassin, mascara, algebra, sugar, coffee, alcohol, algorithm, lemon. So these are all like really important, valuable concepts and items in our language. So like, where would we be if we didn't have, where would we be if we didn't have mascara? But where would we be if we didn't have algebra or sugar or coffee or alcohol? And certainly as an IT hub, as we are in Dublin, if we had no algorithms, we'd be in great trouble, wouldn't we? So you can see that we've got masses of important words that have come from all over the place. So now I've just got a couple of exercises here for you just to see, like, do you know these words? Bona fide, post-mortem, curriculum vitae, vice versa, blase, faux pas, and a person non grata. These are all like English words, and you probably find it hilarious to hear like how I'm pronouncing them, because you're probably saying, hey, but those are my words, and like, why are you saying them in such a sort of funny English way? But like at the end of the day, that's how we pronounce bona fide, post-mortem, curriculum vitae, vice versa, blase, faux pas, a persona non grata. So we could go first to Rome and then to Florence, or what, if you've urgent business in Florence? He can easily prove he's a resident just by showing his passport. When you apply for that job, don't forget to enclose a what with your letter of application. I'm afraid I made an awful the other day. I asked Mariana how her husband was, quite forgetting that he died last year. Nobody likes the new accountant in Jack's office. He's, as far as we're concerned, something was carried out on the victim to establish the exact cause of death. And you look so confident and something about it all that I thought you must have parachuted before. So those are the words: bona fide, post-mortem, curriculum vitae, vice versa, blase, faux pas, and a persona non grata. Do you know them? Okay, let's check. So, we could go to Rome and then to Florence, or vice versa if you have urgent business in Florence. Vice versa means the other way around. He can easily prove he's a bona fide resident just by showing his passport. Bona fide as in genuine. So bona fide means genuine. And when you apply for that job, don't forget to enclose a curriculum vitae, or we call it a CV now, with your letter of application. I'm afraid I made an awful faux pas the other day. I asked Mariana how her husband was, quite forgetting that he died last year. So a faux pas is something that you shouldn't do. So it means a terrible mistake. Nobody likes the accountant. He's a persona non grata, so a person not welcome as far as we're concerned. Post-mortem was carried out on the victim, so after somebody dies, you take a look at the body to find out why they died. That's called post-mortem in English. And you looked so confident and blasé about it all that I thought you must have parachuted before. So blasé means like confident and sort of full of yourself, like, oh yeah, this is easy. That's very blasé. So these words are not massively high frequency, and in a way that they're words that you show off. It probably goes back to the days of, maybe back to the days of the Renaissance, where you're trying to show that you're an educated person, because you don't just stick to boring old phrasal verbs. You actually use Latin verbs, French verbs, and everything else to show that you are European in nature. So the British, they're sitting on the island that's cold and wet, and then all the beauty that there is in Central Europe, all the beautiful architecture that there is in Italy, and the ancient history that there is in Greece. The British wanted to be a part of that, and so they brought all that language into their language to show that they, that when you use this kind of language, you're showing that you are a part of a European culture. So we've got some more words here now. Fellow graduates will be pleased to hear that Caroline Parrott, Neil has just become a director of Pelco Insecticides. If you forget your lines, you'll just have to what? The audience won't notice. The police were unable to charge Jefferson, as he had an unshakable for the time when the robbery had been committed. I was delighted when Miss Starr asked me to furnish her house for her. She gave me something to order whatever I needed. My neighbour is up and coming. He owns several shops and is always looking out for new business opportunities. Susan's husband seems to be big and tough, yet you should see him changing baby's nappies. And I think that man looks just like Mel Gibson. It could be him travelling. He wouldn't want to be bothered by autograph hunters. So do you know these words? Entrepreneur, macho, nay, incognito, alibi, carte blanche, and ad lib. Like nay is interesting because there's an accent on it. And we say, well, in English we don't have accents. But just like there is one here on blasé, like we borrow the words and we're like, oh yeah, well, let's just take the accent too because it looks cool. So every now and again we have these words with accents that we don't have in English. Yeah, that's strange, isn't it? So are you ready to go? Entrepreneur, macho, nay, incognito, alibi, carte blanche, ad lib. Fellow graduates will be pleased to hear that Caroline Parrott, nay, Neil, has become a director of Pelco Insecticides Limited. So nay means born. So it means that her first name, her parents' name was Neil. So like this means that Caroline married someone called Parrott, but when she was a girl, she was called Neil. So you say nay, Neil. Obviously that's English etiquette where you change your name when you get married, which is becoming less popular now. But that's why we need that word nay, so that people, oh yeah, I know that person, but I know her with a different surname. She is nay, whatever she is. If you forget your lines, you'll just have to ad lib. The audience won't notice a thing. So ad lib, lib comes from like liberty. So it just means you'll just have to like speak freely. You'll just have to make it up as you go along. So ad lib means make it up. So if you do something ad lib, you just on the spot think about it and you just do it. Why did you do that? Oh, I just did the ad lib. Means I just did it as I thought about it. The police were unable to charge Jefferson as he had an unshakable alibi for the time when the robbery had been committed. So an alibi, I don't know what the origin of that word is, but an alibi is when you have a story that proves that you were not somewhere else. So your alibi is when you can, yeah, that's what it is. It's a story. So like, if someone says you were there, no, I have an alibi. I was somewhere else. Somebody else can speak for me to show you that I was somewhere else and not wherever I'm being accused of being. So I was delighted when Miss Stars asked me to furnish her house. She gave me carte blanche to order whatever I needed. So carte blanche is like a white card. So basically it means an empty piece of paper. But so when someone gives you carte blanche, that means that they give you complete control, so complete freedom. So this person asked her to furnish your house, buy what you like, whatever you want, just buy it. It's your job. So that's carte blanche. No rules, no regulations, no instructions. My neighbour is up-and-coming entrepreneur. I'm very sure you know that word, entrepreneur. He owns several shops and is always on the lookout for a new business opportunity. And Susan's husband seems to be a big, tough, macho type. Yet you should see him changing the baby's nappy. So macho is not an English word, but we use it. Yeah. And finally, I think that man looks like Mel Gibson. Could be him travelling incognito. So you can see the word recognize in that word incognito. And so if you travel incognito, that means that it means in disguise. But it doesn't really suggest that you're in disguise for us. It means kind of wearing a funny hat and a fake wig and moustache and things like that. But incognito just means somehow traveling that people don't recognize you. So why is English language vocabulary so challenging? I hope that you've just had a little time to reflect on the fact that English has been changing, developing, with hundreds of words arriving and arriving from everywhere else before printing, before standardization. And so that's why it's so complicated and so divergent. But at the same, nevertheless, it's at its core is Anglo-Saxon, Old English, 3 genders, the he, the she, and the it, simple set of verbs and phrasal verbs. That's the core of our language, and then all the Latin, the Greek, the French influence that came later, and so it ran parallel. But the core language is this a Germanic language that came with the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes so long ago. So thank you for listening. I hope it's been useful for you. Bye.